So Karen did a lot. Tony, do you have this one now, or do you need me to do it?
I'll take it.
You guys just have to tell me when it's my turn.
I'll take this one. It's okay with me.
Okay.
I got another one to write up anyway. What's one more?
All right. Well, please let me take the next one then, Joe.
Sure, no worries.
All right. I'm going to call the Capital Planning Committee to order for Monday, February 7th at 8 p.m. All members are present except Ms. Wheeler, who will not be joining us tonight. First item of business is the approval of meeting minutes from January 20th, 2022 and January 24th, 2022. Start with the 20th. Did anyone have any comments for Joe on these?
I have.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think just from a overall perspective in part 2 on the second page, I think the key in the first paragraph of that section 2 is Jason really emphasized that it was phase 0 of the process, and I thought that'd be important to include in the minutes, just because that was, he set the stage with that.
Sure, I can replace the start with as simply phase 0 of the process. Does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's all I really had for that.
Anyone else in those particular minutes? All right, I'll move that we accept the minutes with that one edit. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Hark.
Aye.
Sorry. Braccio.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
And Shoner.
Aye.
And Malinowski's aye. Sorry, Lisa, your images swapped as I moved. So, all right, 24th. Karen wrote these. Jeff, can I ask you to take any edits?
Yeah, of course.
On these?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any edits for Karen?
Jason, go first.
All right, so my first one was under where did it go? It was references to CIPC. We are not CIPC. However, that is the intended name after if town meeting changes the bylaw. So I think capital planning needs to probably be defined and then spelled out. So it's probably just a control find for everywhere it says CIPC, just to be safe throughout the document. That was my main item. The second item was under 3C, where it says overall review of school and regional capital plans. It said Mr. Malinowski encouraged bonding on the safety items. I think it was more along the lines of Mr. Malinowski encouraged bundling of items particularly related to safety because they had not brought forth projects in a long period of time. I don't really care whether they bonded or they'll have to make a strategic funding decision there. The next part was under the Finn Trottier parking lot item. It said Mr. Purple is checking. I think it's more like Mr. Purple was going to evaluate the potential competing interests for that, right? Whether it be a town building or a school building related to the HVAC. And then I thought it was important under breakneck, just to note that we had just received it at the beginning of the meeting, and that's why we didn't take any action during that meeting.
Sure, we had that.
Okay, I'm done with those.
I have a couple. Anyone else does not? The only things I have. Sorry, was anyone else going to say anything? I didn't mean to interrupt there. Okay. So meeting with school administration, Paul Desmond was there as well. So I thought it'd be important to indicate that he was present. So I can
And
have
he's the regional chair.
regional chair of the school committee. Regional school committee chair, sorry.
Correct.
And then in terms of going in order, I thought that they went through the water heater after the school and regional capital plans. So I was going to move that. And then did they also cover the Southborough Schools capital plan? I didn't really see much of a mention of that. They talked about the use of the school revolving fund for capital expenditures, but they also went through the.
It was quick. It was in the latter end, but that's a good, they definitely did. Because then there's some questions. I particularly remember Lisa asking questions around, how it was the NERI part was split, like if they do something, if they don't do something. So I remember a pretty extensive dialogue back and forth there.
Yeah. So I'll add that. And then documents reference, I was going to add in the regional and the Southborough Schools capital budgets. It just says Algonquin capital budget. So I was going to add that in there too. That's all I had.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments on those? All right, then I will move that we accept the minutes with the discussion, subject to the discussion tonight. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Arc,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Shoner,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. All right, chair and members updates. School Research Subcommittee, as everyone's aware, the final report will be presented on Wednesday night to the school committee. This committee does not have a posted meeting for that. The meeting will be videotaped and available. It's on the school's platform, so it works a little differently than the town. So we just can't have 4 members there. I'm only aware of one myself going right now. The presentation is quite extensive. I can tell you that. It'll probably be a pretty lengthy conversation. It will hopefully wrap the committee's work other than getting our final minutes in. So I think the goal, if depending on where the school committee decides to take some of the recommendations, is to ask the Board of Selectmen to disband the subcommittee as soon as possible after that, because there is a second item on the agenda for that same night for the school committee to take up forming a NERI school building committee, which would be a more formal group to analyze it. There's very strict rules on what type of personnel and representation you would have to have if the project gets funded by the MSBA. So that will all be under consideration. There's question of the appointing authority there. We believe it actually is the select board, not the school committee, but Greg Martineau is running all of that to ground. And I think you'll see some sort of collaborative process as that moves forward. So stay tuned on that one in terms of how that would all come together. That doesn't mean something's going to happen there. It's just giving a broader group to start analyzing kind of the next steps there and getting ready for presentation of a feasibility study at the spring town meeting. The MSBA decision, I think we had talked about potentially a verbal yes/no coming last week. They've put it off until the actual formal meeting on March 3rd, which is a public meeting at the state level. So we will know no later than then. They've committed that that's when decisions will be made. So that's all I have to report on that. Any questions, comments?
Just one, Jason, if I may.
Yep.
So for those members that may not be able to attend, obviously we don't want to have a quorum to begin with. When the link gets posted for the meeting, maybe we could, you could, I guess we's not an option, but could you share with the group once it's up so anybody that's interested can go and watch the discussion?
Yes.
Thank you.
I will get it. They usually upload it the next day. So I also believe it will be, I don't know if it'll be live stream on Southborough Access Media, but they do tend to pick up the school committee meetings still. Any questions on that? All right. Joe, any updates from the SHOPSI subcommittee?
No, there's none. We have not met. I'm waiting for the next meeting to get the process rolling again.
All right. All right. All right. I'm going to try something new tonight. I've been watching a few other boards and committees, and Canley have joined some other ones. I'm not going to go around on each topic moving forward. If you have something you want to add, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm moving on. That's how I'm going to try to keep the meetings flowing. So with that, I wanted to debrief on the discussion with the ARPA committee and discuss next steps. Obviously, we have 2 members that sit on the ARPA committee. So I did take, before we go into detail on this, I did take the time to talk to Mr. Haggerty, realizing that Lisa will be abstaining from any votes on this matter because ultimately it'll come before her as a member of the select board. And I was guessing that Tony and Joe were going to save their votes for the ARPA committee, which would leave, at least tonight, myself and Jeff, as if there was a motion, as the only ones that would actually be voting yay or nay. And obviously if Karen was here, she would be in that vote. And if mystery member number 7 ever appears, then, we'd have that too. So he confirmed, which was also my prior understanding, that if I were to move anything right now, and let's just say Jeff and I voted in favor of it, the motion would carry. So it would be a 2-0 vote if Joe and Tony and Lisa abstained from the vote. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know if we're gonna have a motion tonight, but I imagine there's gonna be motions at some point related to ARPA. So just wanted to throw that all out there. So with that being said, as everyone's aware, I was invited by, I guess he was acting chair for a meeting or two, John Wood, to their last meeting to kind of provide a broad overview of the capital plan. As you can imagine, it's not a short discussion, right, when you go into all the moving parts. And my understanding is some of the department heads are also going to be coming behind us. John Parent actually was in front of us. It was a natural, nice lead-in. So we did not leave there with any to-dos per se. I think the committee, unless Joe and Tony, please correct me, something happened after I left. There's no current request of capital in terms of prioritization or anything like that. I think the committee is still trying to kind of get their arms around, where they want to go, given that there's obviously going to be things outside of capital as well. So I'm not sure specifically related to the broader capital plan there's anything we can do at this point, but I just wanted to make sure, Tony and Joe, that jives with what you walked away with and nothing happened after I left.
Yes.
Okay. Tony, you're good with that too?
Yes.
Okay. What I did want to discuss here tonight, though, is as everyone's aware, we've had significant conversations with the Council on Aging related to the broader space needs study. And there is clearly not going to be a definitive, project where everyone gets everything they ever possibly wanted, for at least 5 years, right? Could be longer, like, especially even if you started building a school tomorrow, even once you were to vacate a school, it's going to take time to move people around, do improvements, et cetera, like that. So there was discussion at the ARPA meeting specifically related, and this started with John, but it's obviously the most deferred item we have in the capital plan related to Corderville Hall, and whether we should advance a project specifically under funding with ARPA to perform the work that we've candidly been waiting many years for Assabet to free up and have the capacity to do. My understanding is Assabet's timing is still in flux, but actually is starting to look far more favorable in terms of an accelerated timeline due to some projects dropping off. That's yet to be fully confirmed, but it's actually looking better than it had. But a new option has kind of come forward based on a conversation I had with John Parent, and my understanding he's having the same conversations with the representative Council on Aging, is for roughly the same number we've been carrying in the capital plan, we may be able to actually go out to bid and get the work done in a 3 to 6 month time period after bid. And those numbers have been confirmed in the last week of, being able to do that. So it would be a complete change of approach, right? We've been waiting so long, but I think really until we're asked, I don't feel comfortable doing any sort of prioritization of the capital plan. But I do think what I personally have thought about is, if we're going to do this addition and the bump out, and that's what the town wants, and that's a good use of ARPA funding, or if there's a warrant article sought at some point, the clock has already started to tick, right? Many would tell you the clock started 10 years ago, but I would say we know something's likely going to happen in this town related to getting some of those space needs items figured out longer term, with a more consolidated, broad plan. But would this addition that has been talked about for many years, create, I don't want to call it a Band-Aid, but I'll call it a bandage, to really shore up the needs of that group for, the time period that it is going to take to, basically implement a much longer term plan that's obviously been well discussed at this point. So that's really, at least in my opinion, the item that's on the table. But I realized that was a lot there. So I'm just going to pause and see, level set, where we want to go, if we want to do anything, or just leave it to kind of the Council on Aging and facilities, to continue to discuss that with ARPA. So I'm going to pause for a second. Go ahead, Joe.
I think something that we all need to remember when we're doing this is the ARPA money will be approved by the select board, or at least that's my understanding. So any recommendation from ARPA will go through the select board, not actually through the town. So I think this is at the whim of the select board as to whether they want to pass it or not. And I think you framed it perfectly in ARPA, which was, if we're looking at new schools and whatever it is, that's X number of years out. This is one of the, I think that if it's a project that's going to be done, let's get it over with now so that you can get the most out of your money before it would be changed, if it was going to be changed, if it will be changed, 5, 6, 8, 10 years down the line. The money will be ill spent the longer you wait, if you're actually going to do that and then make changes later with building a school and moving people into Woodward. So I thought when you framed that to the ARPA, that was very accurate. That's all.
Jason, I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
So again, I wasn't part of that discussion, but I'm trying to wrap my head around how it could cost the same with prevailing wage that it would to use the students at Assabet.
It's not this. So it's a number similar to what's been carried in the capital plan.
Okay.
It's not necessarily what the number would be to use Assabet. And my understanding, I haven't seen a detailed quote. John Parent is supposed to get it. I think if you think about it from just a pure contracting perspective,
Mhm.
while prevailing wage is certainly expensive, I don't think the amount of labor you're talking about here is nearly what we're used to, right? I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands, not millions. So I think probably the number we were carrying was inflated over time.
Okay, fair enough.
For Assabet, but it just happens to be right around the same number. So just so everyone's aware, we are carrying 325.
Mhm.
John has told me the number may be a little higher than that, but not much. I just want to see the details before we put a formal number out there, but it's definitely not starting with a 4, which is also important, I think, from a code compliance perspective, in making sure we don't have to do more than what we were intending to do to that building.
Okay, thank you. I was just trying to understand. It makes sense if the number was inflated then up to some level. So thank you.
There any other comments, questions on that?
You're just looking for general discussion here, Jason? I guess I'm not quite sure what you're looking for.
Yeah, because we haven't gotten specificity from ARPA of what you're looking for from capital. And I know you two will represent us very well to bring that feedback back, and you'll have a pretty aggressive meeting. I'm looking at a calendar and saying it's February 7th. This is you have a due date, I believe, to the select board in early March for items for town meeting, right? Is that correct? This isn't technically a town meeting item if it's being funded via ARPA, but I would say from a pure economics perspective, if this is an item that the ARPA committee believes is in the best interest of the town, or you may just bring all recommendations to selectmen and make them make the tough decisions. I don't know how you're going to do this, but I guess where at least I'm at is that if we're going to do something on this and we want to move it forward, it should be on that list for early March, mainly because every month that passes, we enter more uncertainty from a construction environment, or maybe more stability. I don't know, but you want to go shovel in the ground on a project like this in the spring. You don't want to be going shovel in the ground in the summer or the fall. So I'm also trying to get, I'll call it the best bang for our buck, regardless of the funding source, and obviously achieve potentially the longest deferred item on our capital plan. It's certainly the item we first discussed when we were initially formed. So I'm trying to be helpful, but at the same time, I don't know, it's not our call. It's purely recommendation and making sure people are thinking about the facts that I just raised. Go ahead, Joe. You're on mute.
I guess two things. One, we could recommend that it goes on the town warrant regardless and use ARPA funds after the fact. I did have a question that I wanted to, or maybe it's a question for Lisa to take back to the select board, which is a lot of the ARPA, at least from my end in the ARPA discussions that I've been having, some of them really are not so much about what we're spending money on, but how we're spending the money and what the end result would be. As I just said, if you put something in the town warrant and it gets passed, but then we decide to pay for it with ARPA money, which might then create a budgetary situation where there's money that surpluses in the budget because what you put in the warrant goes probably to a tax revenue basis, and creates money that's then surplused at the end of the year. Is there any agenda served by the select board that different types of spending would be advantageous to? Does that make sense? I didn't say that very well, but I've been throwing this idea around in ARPA, and but it's really a select board town type of decision issue.
So Lisa, you can tell me if you don't agree with what I'm going to say, but I do not believe this is an item for capital planning to discuss. So Joe, I think it's a great question.
Yes. Thank you.
I would put it in writing to the chair of the select board and have her bring it to her group. However,
Excellent.
I will have Mark answer the funding question, because I do believe this is relevant to capital planning, is play that scenario through, Mark. If somehow this item ends up on the warrant, which it's not scheduled to be on the warrant as part of any of the capital positions we've taken to date, how does that all play through?
Well, kind of an interesting question, because if this item were to be funded by ARPA, it wouldn't need to be on the warrant. So it's it's almost like you're taking two bites of the apple. If in fact ARPA funding doesn't happen, you would have it on the warrant and the ability to fund it through other means, likely tax base. But again, that's I don't know if you want to call it the beauty of ARPA, but the selectmen can make the decision on the allocation of the funds and the project can move forward. Without further authorization. So it's kind of an interesting question, and I'm not sure what the answer is.
I didn't want to, I phrased it in ARPA and I didn't want to phrase it like this, but the only way I can really phrase it is, I mean, essentially it's like washing the money. And so it comes out, no matter what you're not supposed to pay for it with, if you're washing the money through legitimate projects that it's supposed to go to, that creates a surplus at the other end, the money you can use at the other end is then can be used for anything. Does that make sense?
Well, the only
It's
thing
an
that makes sense
it's an
is that
accounting issue.
Yeah, the only thing that makes sense is if Jeff has taken the minutes that he not put washing the money in, at least, it was said twice, but please don't even put it in once. but
I don't like to put it like that, but that's essentially what it is.
no,
You have this lost revenue piece, right? Like that.
Yes.
That's what I think we should focus on,
Yes.
which gives some liberty to what it can be used for in the current time period.
right.
So I think the questions here are great. Joe, I would encourage you and Tony to send a letter to the select board. But I think from a capital planning perspective, I think it's also important that we send some communication, Lisa, we can put in writing for you, really around aligning on this topic, right? In terms of, are there items that are in the capital plan, and how is that going to be dealt with for this town meeting? Because I think you have, some clarity that would be needed there, just so that everyone is aligned on what's going in the warrant and what is not going in the warrant. And if it's not going in the warrant, why it's not going in the warrant. But to be very clear, because I do see that there are members of the Council on Aging here, this item is not currently in the warrant. So if we were not to have ARPA as an availability, this is slotted for next fiscal year currently. It's still on there. We've taken many votes that it's a high priority, but from a funding, like actually coming out of the general fund, which directly impacts the tax rate that we see in our bills, that's where it's currently scheduled. So that's why I personally would like the clarity to make sure that there's no misunderstanding about where anything sits, and obviously take advantage of an opportunity if this is the right opportunity for the town. Go ahead, Joe.
There, under the ARPA, apparently there's also, we can buy land as a town with the money. And I know that there are a few parcels. I know I've been made aware of one that's right in the center of town, as well as several others. And I'm gathering those would technically be under capital purchasing. So if it does come up, or if there's a reason why somebody come up with good enough reason that some of those parcels or land should be acquired, it would also be advantageous as an asset to the town, as well as a capital expenditure. We have this, as a committee, we have discussed the fact that in that committee that we are not there to originate expenses or things to purchase. So that's not something that if we were bringing it up, we'd bring it up in this committee and forward it to them. Not that Tony and I would bring directly to that committee, as I understand from our discussions in that committee and the way that we're going to conduct ourselves. So I thought I'd make this committee aware of that.
That makes a lot of sense to me. It's kind of like how we act, right? We don't originate requests, we're receiving them. Okay. So anything else on Corderville before I try, Jeff, I'm going to try a motion. I get it's just for the two of us, but just to advance things. But is there any other discussion on Corderville? Okay. So I'm going to move that the Capital Planning Committee submit a letter both to the ARPA committee with a copy to the select board outlining the discussion that occurred here tonight specifically around the urgency with which a decision should be made to ensure clear communication in understanding of project economics, given where we're at on a calendar. There a second?
Second that.
Is there any discussion?
So
Go ahead,
I would
Tony.
just, I guess, I would just make that letter as crystal clear as possible, because sometimes language is used here that is opaque. And so just try to make it as specific and clean as possible so that the ARPA committee can understand what the intent is.
Okay. I mean, just Jeff, my intent would be, obviously, we outline the dates that ARPA has been given. I'll get some dates from Mark about the warrant closing. And obviously, I believe Council on Aging would be the group that should be advocating for the building, but we can advocate around where this is sat in the capital plan and really more as an educational. And I mean, how many conversations have we had about this particular item? And there was a lot of conversations before we were even a committee around it. So that's what I was planning to outline. Connecting the dots is kind of how I put it. All right. Any further discussion? All right. Roll call vote. Braccio,
Abstain.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Abstain.
Joner,
Abstain.
and Malinowski is aye. Before we leave ARPA, I'm just going to indicate I also did have a discussion with that committee, and Mr. Wood was provided with a copy of the capital policy because I've already been made aware of items that are going to be submitted to ARPA that are not on the capital plan. There may be very good reason for that, but that there would have to be some sort of joint review just to make sure we're being fair to all. We've put many other departments that get grant funding through the process. I view this no differently, and I think the policy dictates as such. So that just an FYI that we may start seeing some things we haven't seen before come on, and we'll have to evaluate based on the merits that are brought forward. Anything else on ARPA? All right, going forward, given that hopefully we're not going back to ARPA, Joe and Tony, you'll have a members update every meeting that we meet. And obviously, if there's a topic you need capital to weigh in on and we don't have a posted meeting, just let me know and we'll figure it out. Okay. Next item, 2022 town meeting warrant article, vote on Breakneck Hill remediation. So we got this request right before our last meeting. I'm sure everyone has read cover to cover the opinion, and just really going to open up to discussion of where the committee wants to go with this. Anyone? Go ahead, Jeff.
So I guess, I don't know, maybe this question's for Mark. Is this the only viable option for the town to, I mean, are we 100% responsible for this still? I mean, I know we've had it in our possession for many years, but I don't know, we inherited this, right? And I just gotta understand, like, what is, I guess it's the town's responsibility 100% is, I guess, what I'm trying to ask. Yeah.
I think the short answer is yes.
Okay. Okay.
You all set, Jeff?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, go ahead, Joe.
So the understanding is that this really is just the 60,000, I guess, was for the first test holes to be essentially dug. And this is just to establish the baseline for what's actually there. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is just some of the initial things that would have to be done in preparation for the big, the big things that would need to happen in terms of the remediation efforts.
Yeah, and then do we have an idea? Does anybody have an idea how much that's going to be?
I don't want to give,
I,
I don't, look, I really, I don't want to give a number because I think it's a little bit broad right now.
I don't want to put a pun on this, but I don't know how deep the hole is going to be.
Yeah.
I think if you had to, if you needed to make an assessment, I think it's probably, seven figures.
And there's no option around this, is there?
Look, there isn't. I know that, I had a conversation at some point already about this, and it was like, well, what happens if we don't fund it? And I said, well, look, I said, it's an administrative consent order between the town and DEP. There's no way around us not being able to do this. And if for some reason this went to town meeting and they decided not to fund it, then I'm sure DEP would say, that's fine. When you submit your free cash at the end of the year, we're just going to take off the top what you're supposed to pay to do the work and everything this year and everything. And that'll take care of that. So it's not something we can avoid. I think it's not something that we're coming from a punitive level, that they've been chasing us for years and they finally caught us. This is something I think that the town proactively tried to address and are working with DEP and council is taking a look at that language now before it goes to selectmen. Selectmen haven't even seen the administrative consent order yet. So it's still very much in its infancy, but unfortunately we're talking about FY23 expenses. So we've got to have this conversation, and it's more of a conceptual discussion. And we don't have the hard and fast in front of us yet.
It sounds less like a conversation and more like a shotgun wedding.
It is, but we gave them the bullets. So I don't, it's, again, this is an issue. We've owned this property for 40 years. We knew this property was a farm dump, and, it was a farming operation, everything, and because of the farm dump, we've done everything right for the last, 35 years in terms of monitoring wells and making sure there were no issues. But it's come time that some of the discussions, I think that, started pushing the discussion were conversations in public at conservation level with the commission, and really started to bring it back into light, and conversations that some members may have had with DEP, pushing the envelope a little bit about this. And, here we are. So
Are we also going to end up in trouble with the MWRA? Is this in their watershed?
No, that's not. Let's not make it worse. Yeah. So no, there's no issues. It's not watershed. It's we have no issues with them. And yeah, it's like I said, once we have some better idea of overall impact over the next several years, I haven't seen the schedule yet as to how many years we're actually looking at this cleanup to be. So this is just the first step. I really was interested as to what this is going to cost us, or what costs we had to look to be responsible for fiscal 23.
I have another question.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm thinking outside the box here. What if you were to make this a state park, as an example? Would the state be able to fund all the cleanup efforts and take over the land so it's no longer our problem?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say you wouldn't get the state to take this property for anything at this point. They're not going to take a piece of property that requires a significant level of effort in order to make it usable. I was in a community and we had a road that we were looking for the state to take over, but only if it was brought up to proper standards. So you make the investment, you make it good, and then we'll do it. And I really think the state would take the same look at that, as we're not taking something on that's got a known deficiency that we're going to have to pay to fix. You pay to fix it, and then we'll be interested.
Fair enough. Yeah.
This is definitely a unique capital article, especially given the timing for this year. I really don't want to spend the money, but I don't think we have a choice. And that's not because I don't think it's just it's obviously an issue that predates all of us in this, at least involvement in this committee in town. So, I guess my request would really be, unless someone on this committee has expertise or background in this area, really looking to make sure that someone on the select board or conservation or, really is making sure that we're, fixing this as opposed to just throwing money, to say we're doing something. If the intent is to fix it and remediate it, let's do the right thing. So, that would be my longer term ask as this thing moves forward here, just to make sure we were getting the right advice. And obviously, Mark, I know Melissa's very good with grants, but I think it goes without saying, like, if there is some sort of cleanup stuff coming out of every package that seems to be out there these days that seem to have some, throw-ins, let's just make sure we're staying very close to that as well. And I don't know if there's anything our state legislative delegation can do when they, reach out every once in a while to you.
On 4 days, our delegation is
Yeah.
shrinking by 50%, unfortunately. So
Figured we'd do it while we had two. But yeah, I realize that tide is.
it's happening. It's happening a lot sooner than we expect it to happen, and I'm really happy for Carolyn Dykema. But it is a huge loss for our community in terms of advocacy efforts on our behalf in Boston.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions on this topic? All right, then I will move that we support the request from the conservation agent to add the feasibility study for the Breakneck Hill remediation to the FY23 capital plan. There a second?
Second.
For any further discussion?
Is there going to be a cap on this, or is it going to be per the?
It's per the amount in the thing. I don't have, I just closed it. It's like 59 and change, right? Hang on.
Yes.
I'll get it. Let me get the right number. Unless someone can beat me to it. It is $59,515. That's the amount. All right, so in a motion, it was seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, roll call. Braccio,
Abstain.
Arc,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Aye.
Shoner, and Malinowski is aye. All right. Next couple items should go hopefully pretty quickly. MTC Townwide Survey Committee Collaboration and Member Assignment. So if anyone follows the Board of Selectmen, the MTC did an initial townwide survey. It was mainly based on my understanding from talking to Matt Probst, who's the chair of MTC, was mainly based on discussion with department heads for the most part. I think there was some committees, but ironically enough, there were some department heads that had capital type survey questions and others that didn't. And it really was, I think as Matt and I were talking a little bit about it, and he came to me after some feedback he had at the Board of Selectmen level, really kind of siloed and didn't cut across the verticals that we're looking to cut across as part of our committee. And he did say that, some of the survey questions were, from working directly with the department heads, but others were literally from the template that they started with from, I think it was another city, not in the state of Massachusetts. I think it was like 170 something question survey that I think there's 400 plus responses out of obviously 10,000 residents. Not every resident in town is capable. Like I wouldn't let my kids fill it out, for example. But really what I came away from the conversation with is he's looking for, as they develop their survey for this year, he's looking for collaboration from capital planning. basically for us to assign a member to work. I think it's him, but I'm not sure if it's any of the other MTC members as well. Kind of just to make sure that we're getting our kind of questions answered through that. So if they're putting something out there, that it really is something that's like in our radar, as opposed to, I don't know, I'll call it something that hasn't even been considered. Obviously, there's going to be some open-endedness. So really, I think the ask tonight is really just to figure out if surveying is of anyone's interest. I won't volunteer anyone, but I will certainly bow out of this one. So I don't know if anyone has a burning desire to do this or not, but I do think it'd be helpful to send someone forward. I'm not going to volunteer Karen, but we can certainly ask her next time, or I can ask her. But I'm just making sure everyone's on mute. No one. All right. If Karen doesn't volunteer, I'm going to come back to. I'm going to add this back to the agenda for next meeting, because I think this is a very light commitment. I think it's a couple of probably proofs of what they're going through, and then they did offer to be able to run targeted surveys outside of their big one if we have things we need to get feedback on. So Tony and Joe, I'd actually take note of that too, if ARPA's doing any surveying with all that time you have to come up with your recommendations.
I believe the plan is for ARPA to put one out at the moment.
So I would call Matt in the MTC. They have infrastructure already in place. And I think have experience doing that, if that's where you guys are going to go. So, all right, we will punt on that one tonight. I will follow up with Karen. Otherwise, I'll be back. The next is we received a request from the EDC. We were not the only ones to receive the request. There were multiple other boards that received the note. I think you all might have been on the email, if I'm getting my emails correct. As everyone remembers from last year, for those of you that were around, there was this one-stop grant process, which Governor Baker had rolled out a year ago, which basically took 10 grant programs and rolled them into one. And you can do like an initial preview with the state, so they can help you determine whether you're going to even be eligible or score well before you go through, I'll call it the detailed grant application. So it's really in the expression of interest period at this point. So I wrote back and said we hadn't had a chance to meet, but did elaborate on 2 items that we had discussed previously. Obviously, Mr. Wood was here from the EDC probably 6 months ago, related to Route 9, particularly around wastewater, but they've now secured a grant to do some initial planning related to that. And I said, if they need some help from an infrastructure perspective, then that's obviously where capital would be happy to weigh in. And then I reminded them of last year we had put in related to the Corderville Road project. I think we spent a lot of time talking about. We did not do a formal grant on that one because they were looking for imminent private development. So I did say that's still out there. I think Karen had it for somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million along that stretch, but asked for them to, and Lisa, this may be for the select board. Really, I don't know that capital can advance that one on our own because we need to tie it to private development, but thinking between the EDC and what planning's doing with the MBTA, given that that stretch of road goes from the MBTA to Route 9, if someone can help think through that, that'd be great. But I don't know what else we as capital can do other than just make, I guess, I'm not solutioning, really just throwing out kind of where I think we need to focus, but I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts. Okay. Mark, who's running that process?
I'm sorry, Jason, can you ask that again?
Who's running the EDC? Who's running the one-stop grant process that EDC reached out to us about? I know they were doing some submissions of their own, but who is coordinating, quarterbacking that?
The selectmen are quarterbacking.
Okay. So, select board representative, do you need anything from capital? And or is there any dots we can connect on that? And I realize you may not be able to answer that tonight, but I think that's at least the question I have of, how to advance this based on the feedback we got last year.
Okay, Jason. I can't answer this tonight, but let me
Okay.
get some answers and bring it to the board.
All right. Anyone have anything on this? All right. Next item is discussion of space needs presentation from January 2022, and any required next steps. We did allow feedback for about 10 days to go back to Ken and Courtney. There were a series of submissions. Most did it individually because boards and committees didn't meet. So I actually commend all of those that sent in something in writing just for actually following the open meeting law and just really thinking about whether they were acting as an individual or as a member of board and committee. Some department heads did reach out with some verbal feedback that didn't go necessarily into writing. Ken and Courtney were obviously looking to stop their scope, which, I think makes sense given the amount of work that went into it. I would say the one thing that came out of it that is certainly going to require some more digging before anything happens is there was a very strong interest from those that are interested in the library. This didn't just come from library board of trustees members. It was a broader picture of looking at ways to potentially, if Woodward were to become available, get the entire library plus whatever additional space they needed into Woodward. That obviously wouldn't fit with everything that's there now. But one of the options that we're not studying yet, but could be studied is Mark is having our town council look at if the library were to move, whether it be to Woodward or somewhere else, what can that library be used for? Given we do have some historic preservation restrictions on at least the facade based on the recent CPA work. We also have deeds and potentially town meeting votes. So getting hopefully our good money out of our fixed fee for town council. So Mark has sent him and members on an archaeological dig back to, I believe, early 1900s to just provide really before anyone puts any pencil to paper and even has a discussion around whether that's a viable scenario, understanding what can and can't happen with the library longer term. So we will just wait for their feedback. We obviously have the school committee meeting on Wednesday night as well, which will be important, I think, as part of this. And then I think, if that plan were to proceed, we'd have a meeting of the interested parties just to make sure we understand where we're going forward and making sure we're actually going to be scheduling out something that would be met with resolving some questions that are out there as opposed to creating even more, which I don't think is the intent of any additional exercise. So the school research subcommittee has also discussed with the superintendent his particular space in the school administration space. And as you all know, right, that's shared space between the region, Northborough and Southborough. They actually share employees too. But that there has been discussion as part of the school research subcommittee, and it will be a bullet point on Wednesday night that Trotter is also an option for that group as well. It wouldn't create necessarily some of the operational synergies, but I think that group, which is about 7,000 or 8,000 square feet potentially of at least option 7, that was the original recommendation, is certainly flex. And then I'll leave it with certain departments that submitted feedback. Mark was able to facilitate some time for some of those department heads that really hadn't put eyes on the space to actually go take a walk through. And I would term it probably more eye-opening to some in terms of potential different, what's on a piece of paper isn't always, what you see necessarily in person. So I think depending on where everything starts to fall in place, I think there are multiple paths forward still. And I just thank everyone for their feedback. And as we all know, it's never easy to get feedback, especially when there's very little positive coming and all negative coming at you. But that's why you throw these things out there, because that's what gets you to the right plan. So any other thoughts or any feedback anyone's heard on their own? I'm just really giving you what I think has been formally submitted at this point.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So on that suggested, option where the library goes to Woodward, I guess the only thing I would think through is just the whole discussion we had on parking, right? If you're gonna have senior center that is already concerned about parking, and then high volume group or department, I guess what I would call library being at Woodward as well. Is that gonna be, is that even a possibility? And I don't know if that was discussed as part of those options. I mean,
There would be groups coming
library's
out. There would be
Sorry, go
groups coming. You're going to have to keep the library. It's just a matter of what it can be left for. So
no, I'm sorry. What I mean is, if you bring the library to Woodward, is there enough parking there for everything else plus Woodward, plus library, plus senior center?
all that's not going to be able to be in the same building, Jeff. So something's going to leave
Okay.
that building. So parking's going to continue to be something that has to be focused on at any site, depending on the reuse.
Okay.
So it's a good question. I just don't think I do start adding square footage numbers in my head. Can't all fit. So
Right.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting notion of moving the whole library there. So we'll watch that play out. I mean, the parking is an issue, I think, regardless, and depending on how many people move to that facility. But it's also, I have a background experience with traffic engineering. There's going to be an issue with just access on that little road. So, which I'm sure someone's thinking about. But the traffic pattern is going to be dramatically different for a school versus all of those departments being in that building. And I'll leave it at that.
Where were you for the public safety building, Tony? I swear we spent more time on the interaction between that traffic circle at Woodward and the emergency vehicles, and actually changed, as many people remember, the emergency vehicle egress about 1 week into them operating that facility. So where were you? That's all I gotta say.
When I first saw that, I thought, well, that's not going to last, and then they changed it. But anyways, there's a real access problem at Woodward if you put all those departments in there.
Yeah. So we look forward to your feedback once we figure out what can go where. So Ken and Courtney are going to wrap up and do whatever final deliverables. I believe Mark has already paid authorized payment. I don't think the check's gone out yet for their final bill. And then they'll be in holding pattern for any potential additional scope if we are to move forward with anything. Okay. Ongoing capital project updates. The townhouse has officially a designer. Did we talk about the process on that? I don't think we did. So the Board of Selectmen did award in the last month the contract to Spencer Sullivan, who was involved with the library project, as well as did some of the work last year on the feasibility. The interviews were not obviously conducted by us, but we had done the OPM ones. So Lisa, I know you had made some comments at the select board, from what I remember, just on consistency. I think this will lend into some of my comments I come up with. I just want to go over in our next item on the standing committee bylaw, but that's moving forward. So hopefully we'll be out to bid and know what that's going to cost. And I think optimistically, what John Parent has informed me is that the OPM is already starting to see the market stabilize in terms of some bids, especially for the type of work we're doing there. So he's optimistic that we're not going to be at the high end of that, but obviously we won't know until bid day. The fire department tender, I talked to Chief Achilles before the last meeting, which was when we originally had this agenda on there. It's delayed. That's the headline. We're not going to see that in 2022, based on the delivery schedule. Mark, can you speak to, is there actually a contract yet, or is that still going between the two attorneys?
I don't have a contract yet.
So my understanding from the chief, though, is it has not delayed assembly at this point. So, and we still have our slot, but it's delayed. The other thing is that the number for the truck will basically leave no budget left for equipment. Chief has assured me that they will be able to put equipment into the truck. Remember, this is a new truck, so it's an additional piece of apparatus that we didn't have before. So it's not like you can move from old truck to new truck, but he feels like within his funding allocations, he will be fine. I made sure, given some of the bigger discussions we're having as a town, that I said we need to be locked down on our capital plan for at least the next 5 years, you know. So he said he had nothing to add. So I moved on from the conversation. So I guess there are any questions on that? All right. Joe, anything on the library interior renovations?
I did not talk to John in the last 2 weeks, but they should be finishing up the carpet in the back half by the last report that he gave me.
Looks like it's closed next week, so I assume that's what it's closed for.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they should be moving on that right now.
I heard everyone was very happy. I have not seen it, but I heard everyone was very happy with how it came out.
Yeah, well, it was interesting listening to some of the people talk about the color deliberations. But yes, other than that, yes. That's what I've been hearing.
I won't go there. Okay. The next item is capital planning standing committee bylaw. So we have received no feedback. So as you remember, we did talk to advisory about this. They were kind of going back and forth in their meeting about how they were going to deal with some of the provisions, because, you know, I think there was some discussion still of whether they should have a representative or not. I think based on the warrant closing, advisory not having their own warrant article, I think they're just at least taking a break for this year from this topic. So, and I did not get any proposed changes back to our bylaws. So absent the advisory or the select board, who would be the sponsoring sponsor of the article coming forward, you know, I think it's done. I did want to raise one thing for just consideration is I have found it very difficult, and I love Lisa's word, use of the word collaborate. I have found it very difficult to effectuate change on some of these things. You know, is the one that was dealing with 2 out of the 3 projects for this year at least, and have spent a lot of time studying how other towns deal with this. Most towns have permanent building committees that really oversee. Now, permanent building committees wouldn't oversee a fire department tender, for example. I'm of the view, and I could be in the minority here, that the language might need to be a little stronger from an oversight perspective than what we currently have, mainly because, you know, especially as an ad hoc committee, really everything we do is recommendation in nature. It would really, in kudos to every department head in some other elected boards that really don't have, right? I use the school committee as a prime example, right? They could just say, yeah, we got our own processes, we're all set. You know, I think we're trying to do the right thing and create transparency around these things and bring insight to how, you know, at least if we do have experience in the area or just a different thought process to ask the right questions. So there were 2 things I was thinking about, but I did not draft language because I wanted to see where everyone was at first, was really, you know, maybe strengthening some of the language around what oversight really means. And if it's in a bylaw, it really applies to everyone. It doesn't, separate out by appointing authority. And then 2 is adding specific language that says that the committee shall act in place of a permanent building committee if there isn't one in place, or an ad hoc, right? So use Neary, for example. Most of the other towns I was looking at when thinking about what a charge could look like there basically have permanent building committee members on it. I'm not suggesting we go form a permanent building committee for the town, for one project, but really just putting, some guardrails around what we could get involved with and not have kind of the debate I spent 3 months trying to get people on board last year with. We're trying to be helpful. And then I'm not seeing that we're in a better spot this year. Based on some, we're going to be turning back a lot of money, but I'm not sure that some of these projects have moved at the speed they need to move and have been the wisest use of funds in some instances. So I'm going to pause there, be quiet, and see what you all think. Go ahead, Tony.
So let me just make sure I understand what you're proposing. So you're proposing to add language to the document that describes what this committee does. That says if there's no building committee, then this committee will act as one?
Or a subcommittee thereof. It'll probably be a subcommittee.
I don't know. To me, that doesn't, I guess I don't know why this committee would take that on. No, I'm not that experienced in all of these town boards and organizations and how this works. It seems to me having a building committee is something the planning board or some other organization in town should be dealing with. But I'm not an expert here. But it's not clear to me why this committee should be the default building committee.
So
Just my opinion.
Yeah, no. So for a school or even public safety building, there's the select board formed a separate committee, which is made up of many community representatives with many stakeholder interests, of which capital planning would likely be a member of that. We weren't around when public safety occurred. I'm talking about like the smaller projects that don't require or don't have 5 boards or committees with an interest in it. And it's really mainly a check and balance of process, timeline, and what is actually being spent. I don't envision it would be all 7 of us. It would be a small subcommittee that would meet during the project, but they should be short duration to really just make sure it's moving on. Planning would have absolutely nothing to do with it, though. They're actually a check in the process. The project usually has to go to planning if it meets certain thresholds, and they actually would not want to be involved on our side because they're actually the check on the other side to put rules and regulations in place around the project, including noise and all that stuff. I don't know if that answers your question.
I will pause because there's just a lot I don't understand about how the Southborough town government functions. So I'll just listen for a while.
Okay, go ahead, Joe.
Actually, I sort of wanted to build on what Tony just alluded there is who currently is the oversight for all of these things?
Department heads.
Just department heads. So there's no independent committee looking out for any of these. Okay, I can see it.
No, I mean, I guess recreation theoretically, technically has the oversight on
Recreation projects.
CPA clearly has oversight on projects that they're funding. Everything else is
So all the oversight sort of in silo, if there is a silo in that regard. So if CPC start doing funding, they're sort of looking after it. If funding comes from rec, if it goes through facilities though.
Yeah, and I think the world of John Parent, but it's on his shoulders, and
he doesn't have another silo, for instance, like recreation looking after it. So I guess, is that what the Board of Selectmen wants to do? Do they want to put it under capital? I guess is the leading question there, or the baited question.
Well, I think that's the question I'm trying to decide whether we even advance for them to weigh in on. I'm not concerned about the big projects. I'm concerned about the couple $100,000 here or there that add up to something.
Yeah. No, and when we talked about it before, and you know, I have generally kept in touch with John Parent during the process at the library. So I think I know what you're getting at. And as we talked about before for that project, I mean, John does a good job at he's called me before to keep me informed too if there was something sudden. So you know, it certainly wasn't bloodletting to keep up with him and see what they were doing. And I guess that I would say it just depends on how much work we have. You know, if we can, if we're not too taxed out doing other things, then we seem to be accumulating subcommittees, although we'll be getting rid of 21 Highland and I don't know what else. And I guess the school
School's going away. It's going away.
Yeah. So, you know, in the next couple of months, we'll be dishing 2 committees. Should free up a little bit of time.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, so right now this committee, and again, I don't want to come across negative, just asking questions to understand. This committee essentially makes recommendations to the planning board, I guess, or the select board about how to spend money. And so it seems like that's, you know, a committee that's making recommendations, you know, so people can understand. A committee that's now, I don't know, operating or reviewing an ongoing projects. I mean, that's a pretty different agenda. And maybe it makes sense for this committee, but that's a pretty different agenda.
You know, yeah, I mean, what I would say is the projects that we recommended to come forward with an amount, and a lot of times we haven't had this discussion, at least in your tenure, but last year we had a lot of question, do we have the right amount? And, you know, the tender is a great example. We had that was a new request. We had a lot of people on the fence about it for a long time. And we ended up with the original amount the chief had proposed, but there were members on the committee that wanted half that amount, or, you know, split the difference. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a 200 or 300 and a 400 number out there at certain points in time. So I'm just asking the question of, you know, we do have an oversight provision. It's in our charge. We are proposing it as well as part of the formal charge. It's very light though. And if that's the will of where we want to go, I'm totally fine with that. I just, I will probably not be the one volunteering to do a few of I'll volunteer for larger building committees probably, but I wouldn't be the one volunteering for the lighter touch just because I feel like I'm rubber stamping things 60 days after they've occurred.
And one other thing, and again, not trying to be negative, just exploring oversight or reviewing often implies responsibility. And this committee today recommends. So, you know, there's a potentially a pretty significant semantic difference there between, you know, authority for executing a project versus recommending that a project be done. So I don't know. I'd have to think about that more.
Any other thoughts?
I will add something, Jason, just to think about as talking about, you know, strengthening oversight on smaller projects. If there really isn't now, I think if it's within the bandwidth of this committee to do, it's just another check and balance for the taxpayers. But I think at the end of the day, they're the ones who benefit from having solid numbers, not having surprises potentially. I don't view this as a huge heavy lift. I again, until we start moving forward with it potentially. I don't know, but any time that we can assist, I know we've seen on some projects over the years that there've been a lot of issues with, once it goes out to bid and the add-ons and everything that come back and the projects run well over, that some level of internal oversight might have been able to help. And I think there's a huge level of expertise on this committee. So I'm just asking again to keep the discussion going and for everyone to really think about it, because at the end of the day, it's the taxpayers who benefit from this. Thank you.
So, Lisa, I know you've got a lot of homework tonight. I would just say when the select board discusses what language they want in the article, you're the sponsor. I would just, I'm happy to summarize the conversation, but it's really how strong and how transparent do you want it to be, and see where it goes. We can, if the desire is for some oversight, but more collaborative in nature, then I think you already have the language. If the language is desired to be strengthened and to go as far as like what we typically see with building committees, et cetera, then obviously the committee can certainly put something forward, but I know we're on borrowed time. It's just it's not like going to a select board anymore and changing a charge. It's, codifying something in town code that you obviously have to have an act to undo or add to.
And obviously, Jason, bringing anything back to the board, they're going to ask, what the committee thinks as well. So, any more solid information I can bring back obviously benefits the discussion as well.
Joe had his hand up, so let him go.
Yeah. I just wanted to confirm. So this is language that you insert into the language for the warrant?
So the article we've put forward thus far has an oversight provision already in it.
Right.
It's very similar to what we're currently operating under as an ad hoc committee.
Okay.
And it does apply to all boards and committees. The question is how, what do the taxpayers want? My personal view is just now having experienced it, 3/4 of a year, without teeth behind it, it's a second job. People don't really want to deal with it. So I would just say, my recommendation is if the board is looking for additional transparency, this is again, my personal view, the board is looking for additional transparency around how some of the largest articles at town meeting are actually being spent. I think the language needs to be strengthened. If the board is content with what's happening right now, I think you just leave it right as is, and then we will rely on formal building committees and project committees to execute other larger projects that are millions of dollars in cost. That's my view. I don't know where the rest of you stand. Anyone?
I think Tony had some good points, so I'd like to maybe think about it a little bit, if that's possible.
Okay, Lisa, when do we need to let you know by?
So I was just going to ask, when is our next scheduled meeting, Jason?
I was planning, unless something comes up ARPA related, I was not planning to meet until after the week of February vacation, which would put us in and around February 28th.
Okay, so, I mean, at this point, it's in the warrant as a placeholder. I mean, obviously, the language can change up until, I think the goal of the board was to have things pretty much wrapped up, or at least have the general discussions all take place. And Mr. Purple, you can jump in and correct me. By our first meeting in March, I think we were looking to have finalized language and whatnot. So I think, Mark, if Capital comes back at their last meeting in February and we bring it and discuss it at the meeting, first meeting in March, if there's going to be changes made, we should be still in line with where you need to be to get the warrant printed and get council review.
I would say yes, but I can be more certain after your meeting next week when you assumably set the date for town meeting. So,
Okay, fair
yeah,
enough.
yeah, given the information I have, I'll say yes.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, Jason, so if you could put it on for that, and, you know, then when we go over the specific warrant articles, which we need to do by the first meeting in March anyway, we can certainly bring a recommendation back if there is one for change. Thank you, Mark.
All right. So I should ask now, does the 28th work?
I seem to have meetings all the time, so I'm sure it's fine for me. Oh, actually, yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
I
You can
think
come back.
okay.
You can come back to me. I have no intent of having a meeting the week of the 21st. So it would have to be some other time the week of the 28th, probably, if because I don't plan on meeting next week either. Okay, so everyone's tentatively good for the 28th. Let me know if anything changes. All right. Public comment. Okay, I'm seeing none. Any other business? Seeing none, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joe. Roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Donor,
Aye.